What if one man's frustration with his church changed the entire course of human history? Not a king, not a general, not a conqueror with an army, just a monk with a pen and a list of questions. This is the story of how one ordinary man cracked open the most powerful institution in the world, and why the world you live in today would look completely different without him. This is the story of the Protestant Reformation. Close your eyes for a second and imagine Europe in the year 1500. No internet, no free press, no democracy, no freedom of religion, just one church, one pope, and absolute total control over every single human life from the moment you were born to the moment you died. The Catholic Church in the 1500s was not just a religious organization, it was the most powerful force on earth. It's more powerful than any king, more powerful than any government. Think about that for a moment. If the Pope said something, it was the word of God. No debate, no questions. If you disagreed with the church, you weren't just wrong. You were a sinner, enemy of God, and your soul was going to hell. Kings needed the Pope's approval to rule. Wars were started and stopped by the church. Laws were made by church officials. Education was controlled by the church. Even after you died, your family had to pay the church to pray for your soul. The church was everywhere, in everything. And for most ordinary people, farmers, blacksmiths, mothers, laborers, this was just life. This was normal. This was the only world they had ever known. But underneath this world of gold crosses and cathedral bells, something was rotting. Here is something that will make your jaw drop. By the early 1500s, the Catholic Church had become deeply, openly, shamelessly corrupt. Let's start with the most shocking example: indulgences. An indulgence was basically a piece of paper, a certificate. And the church was selling these certificates to ordinary people with an extraordinary promise. Buy this, and your sins will be forgiven. Buy this, and your dead family members will get out of purgatory faster. The church was selling people a shortcut to heaven. Imagine a poor farmer. He works from sunrise to sunset every single day. He barely has enough food for his children, but his wife just died. And a church official comes to his village with a cart full of these certificates and tells him, "Your wife is suffering right now. But if you pay, she will be free." What does that farmer do? He pays. He gives everything he has, because what choice does he have? This was happening all across Europe every single day. And where was all that money going? Straight to the top. Church leaders, bishops, cardinals, even popes were living like kings, massive palaces, expensive feasts, fine clothing, political power, personal armies. Pope Leo X, who was pope when the Reformation started, is famous for saying, "God has given us the papacy. Let us enjoy it." The leader of the entire Christian world saw his position not as a responsibility, but as a personal luxury. And the ordinary people? They were kept completely in the dark. The Bible, the most important book in the Christian faith, existed only in Latin, a language that almost no ordinary person could read or understand. Only priests and scholars knew Latin. The people had no way to check what the church was telling them. They couldn't open the Bible and say, "Wait, where does it say I have to pay for my wife's soul?" They couldn't, because they couldn't read it. The church's message to the common people was simple and brutal. Pay, obey. Don't ask questions. And for hundreds of years, people did exactly that. But not everyone, because somewhere in Germany, in a cold stone monastery, a young monk was asking questions that nobody was supposed to ask. He was not going to stop. His name was Martin Luther. And everything was about to change. Martin Luther was not a rebel. He was not a revolutionary. He was not someone who woke up one morning and decided to destroy the church. He was actually the opposite. He was a deeply religious man, a monk, a university professor. Someone who loved God so much that the corruption around him genuinely broke his heart. Luther had spent years trying to be the perfect Christian. He prayed for hours every day. He confessed his sins constantly. He punished himself physically, going without food, without sleep, all because he was terrified of God's judgment. And yet, no matter what he did, he never felt good enough. He never felt forgiven, because the church had built a system where you could never feel good enough. Because if you felt good enough, you would stop paying. That was the machine, and Luther was finally starting to see it. In 1517, a man named Johann Tetzel came to Germany. He was a church official, and he was selling indulgences with the enthusiasm of a marketplace salesman. He even had a catchy little slogan, As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. Pay your money here, the coin drop. Your loved one is free. For Martin Luther, this was the final straw. On October 31st, 1517, Luther sat down and wrote a document. He called it his 95 Theses, to 95 points of argument against the practice of selling indulgences and the corruption of the church. He wasn't trying to start a revolution. He was following the normal academic tradition of his time, writing down his arguments and inviting other scholars to debate them. He nailed this document to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg, Germany. And then something happened that Luther never expected. Someone took his document, made copies. And those copies were handed to a brand new invention that had just recently arrived in Europe: the printing press. Within 2 weeks, Luther's 95 Theses had spread across all of Germany. Within 2 months, they had spread across all of Europe. Thousands and thousands of copies in the hands of ordinary people, scholars, priests, and princes. For the first time in history, an idea had gone viral. The church had always been able to silence its critics, arrest them, burn their writings, execute them quietly before anyone even heard their name. But this time, the idea was already everywhere. There was nothing left to silence. The Catholic Church was furious. Church officials demanded that Luther take back everything he had written, admit he was wrong. Luther refused. In 1521, Luther was called to appear before the most powerful court in Europe, the Diet of Worms. Standing face to face with the Holy Roman Emperor himself, Charles V. The room was filled with the most powerful men in the world: cardinals, princes, emperors, all of them staring at this one German monk, waiting for him to break. They put his writings on a table in front of him. They asked him one simple question: "Do you take back what you wrote? Yes or no?" Martin Luther looked around the room. He paused. And then he said something that people still remember 500 years later. "Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. God help me." He would not take it back. The church declared him a heretic, was officially excommunicated, thrown out of the church, cut off from God's grace according to Catholic teaching. In that era, this was the most extreme punishment imaginable. Essentially meant you were spiritually dead. But Luther was protected by a German prince named Frederick the Wise, who hid him in a castle. And while hiding there, Luther did something extraordinary. He translated the entire Bible into the German language. For the very first time, ordinary German people could pick up the Bible and read it themselves. No priest needed, no Latin needed. Just open it and read. This one act alone changed everything, because once people could read the Bible themselves, they started asking the same questions Luther had asked. Where does it say the Pope has this power? Where does it say we have to buy indulgences? Where does it say any of this? The answer, they discovered, was it doesn't. What started with one monk in Germany quickly grew into something far bigger than any one person. Across Europe, other voices began to rise. In Switzerland, a reformer named Huldrych Zwingli began challenging the church with his own set of reforms. He believed the church had drifted so far from the original teachings of Christianity that it needed to be rebuilt almost from scratch. In Geneva, a brilliant and intense scholar named John Calvin built an entire new system of Christian theology. His ideas about faith, salvation, and church structure became the foundation of what we now call Calvinist or Reformed Christianity, influencing millions of people for centuries to come. Then there was King Henry VIII of England. Wife's break from the Catholic Church was a little less spiritual. Henry wanted to divorce his wife so he could marry someone else and hopefully have a male heir for his throne. The Pope refused to allow it. Henry's response was simple. He declared himself the head of a brand new church, the Church of England. No Pope required. His reasons were far more political than religious. But the result was the same. Another massive piece of Europe had broken away from Rome. And here's what made this moment in history so extraordinary. Every single one of these people had a different reason, a different motivation. Luther wanted truth, Calvin wanted order, Zwingli wanted purity, Henry wanted power. But together, without planning it, without coordinating it, they were all pulling at the same thread. And the entire fabric of the medieval church was coming apart. The Catholic Church had ruled Europe for over 1,000 years. Now, for the first time, it was losing. But the biggest question still remained. Why did this succeed when every other challenge to the church had failed? Throughout history, many people had challenged the Catholic Church before Martin Luther. They had raised the same questions, pointed at the same corruption, demanded the same changes, and every single one of them had been silenced, arrested, burned at the stake, erased from history before their ideas could reach anyone. So why was this time different? Why did the Protestant Reformation succeed when everything before it had failed? The answer comes down to three things. Three forces that all came together at exactly the right moment in history. Force 1, the printing press. We already talked about how Luther's 95 Theses spread across Europe within weeks. But let's really understand what this meant. Before the printing press, if you wanted to copy a document, someone had to sit down and write it out by hand, word by word, page by page. It could take months to make a single copy. Books were so rare and expensive that only the very wealthy could own them. The church had used this to its advantage for centuries. It controlled what was written, controlled what was copied. It controlled what people read and learned and believed. But Johannes Gutenberg's printing press changed all of that completely. Now ideas could be copied by the thousands in just a matter of days. Luther's writings, his translations of the Bible, pamphlets written by other reformers, all of it was flying off printing presses all across Europe faster than the church could ever hope to stop it. For the first time in history, information was free. And free information is something that no institution, no matter how powerful, can fully control. The printing press didn't just help the Reformation. In many ways, it made the Reformation possible. It forced a political ambition. Here's the part of the story that doesn't get talked about enough. The Protestant Reformation was not just a religious movement. It was also a massive political opportunity, and plenty of powerful people were very happy to take advantage of it. The Catholic Church owned an enormous amount of land across Europe. It collected taxes. It had political influence in every kingdom. For local kings and princes, the church wasn't just a spiritual authority. It was a rival power, sitting right in the middle of their territory. When Luther's ideas gave these rulers a religious reason to break from Rome, many of them jumped at the chance. Not because they were deeply moved by Luther's theology, but because breaking from the church meant they could seize church lands, collect church taxes, and remove a powerful political competitor from their kingdoms. The German princes who protected Luther, the kings who adopted Protestant reforms, many of them were making calculated political decisions as much as spiritual ones. This is what gave the Reformation its armor. Luther alone could have been arrested and executed. But Luther, backed by powerful German princes, that was a much harder problem for the church to solve. Force 3, the Bible in the people's hands. This is perhaps the most quietly revolutionary force of all three. When Luther translated the Bible into German, and when other reformers translated it into French, English, and other local languages, something profound happened. Ordinary people could now read the most important book in their faith for themselves. And what they found when they read it was a very different picture from what the church had been telling them for centuries. They found that many of the church's most profitable and powerful practices had very little foundation in the actual words of the Bible. Once a person reads something with their own eyes, no one can tell them they didn't read it. This created a completely new kind of Christian believer. Someone who didn't just accept what a priest told them from the front of a church. Someone who thought for themselves. Someone who asked questions. That shift in mindset, that individual. Personal relationship with faith became one of the most powerful and lasting changes the Reformation produced. Not just for religion, but for all of human thinking. The price of revolution, blood, and war? Now, it would be dishonest to tell this story without talking about the terrible cost. The Reformation did not bring peace. It brought war. As Europe divided between Catholics and Protestants, decades of brutal religious conflict followed. Neighbor turned against neighbor. Kingdoms went to war over which version of Christianity was the true one. The worst of it was the 30 Years' War, which lasted from 1618 to 1648. It was fought mostly on German soil. Entire cities were destroyed. Villages were wiped out. Somewhere between 8 and 12 million people died from battle, from famine, from disease, in a war that was, at its core, about religion. It was one of the deadliest conflicts in all of European history. And yet, even from this terrible destruction, something important was born. When the war finally ended with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, the agreement included a radical new idea. The idea that different rulers could follow different religions, that states could have different faiths and still coexist. It was one of the very first steps toward what we now call religious freedom, the idea that no single authority gets to tell every person on earth what to believe. The world the Reformation built. Step back now and look at the full picture. Because the Protestant Reformation didn't just change Christianity, it changed everything. The idea that ordinary people should read and think for themselves, that individual conscience matters, that no institution is above being questioned, these ideas didn't stay inside church walls. They leaked into politics, into science, into philosophy, into the very way human beings understood themselves and their place in the world. The Reformation helped pave the road to the scientific revolution, because once you are allowed to question the church, you start questioning everything else too. Scientists like Galileo and Copernicus were working in a world that was slowly learning to value individual observation and reason over institutional authority. It planted the seeds of the Enlightenment, the great age of human reason, philosophy, and individual rights that shaped the modern world. It influenced the development of democracy, the belief that no leader, no king, no pope has unlimited power over the people, and it transformed education forever. If every believer must read the Bible personally, then every believer must learn to read. Protestant communities across Europe began building schools, universities, and libraries at a pace the world had never seen before. Today, over 900 million Protestants live on every continent on earth, hundreds of different denominations, different traditions, different expressions of faith, all tracing their roots back to that one monk, that one document, and that one October morning in 1517. Martin Luther did not set out to break the world apart. He just wanted the truth. He wanted the church he loved to be honest. He wanted ordinary people to have a direct personal connection to their God without having to pay for it. He was one man, with a pen, with questions. With a conscience he refused to silence. So the next time someone tells you that one person cannot change history, remember the monk, remember the door, remember the 95 questions. And remember, it only takes one voice, backed by truth, to shake an empire. If you found this story as powerful as we do, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of history. Thanks for watching this video.